Welcome to Semper Fi. I'm your host, Mark Bonstein, Staff Sergeant, or commonly referred to as Staff Sergeant B. Got another guest on the show today. We'll get started with what happened in U.S. military history, as we do every week. In 1951, with the Air Force, numbers of MiG-15 attack jets were shooting down one F-80 and one F-84. Lieutenant Colonel Williams Bertman of the 27th FEG shot down a MiG-15 to score the first Air Force aerial victory by an F-84 Thunderjet. That was a mouthful. In 1961, in the Navy, USS George Washington completes its first operational voyage of the Fleet Ballistic Missile Submarine Stay and Submerge for 66 days. And that was in 61. And in 1968, on the Marines, most of the publicized and controversial battle of the war begins at Khe Sanh, below the 14-mile mark of the DMZ. And that's what happened on January 20th. So really nothing happened with the Army that time. Well, my guest was a retired colonel in the Army, Dr. Roberts. Some of you may know him. He enlisted in the Army in 1968 and retired in 1990. Welcome, Dr. Roberts.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for being on the show. Okay, we'll start out with the basic who, what, whens, and whys, and wheres. Where did you go to boot camp?
I had the honor of attending basic combat training at the beautiful Fort Polk, Louisiana, commonly referred to as Tigerland.
I've seen that movie.
Yeah, yes. I had the wonderful experience of being in several places that they'd made movies of.
Really?
Yes, I have. And there's quite no place like Fort Polk, Louisiana. that's the best I can tell you.
You really seem like you like it there.
Yes, I did. I loved it when I left.
Really?
That was a very good.
And you went to boot camp in 1968.
I did. I enlisted. I was regular Army, and I joined when other people were avoiding the draft. So I thought that was a good time to enlist. And it was May 5th, 1968, and arrived in boot camp at Fort Polk just in time for the summer heat to arrive in Louisiana, which I thought was appropriate to prepare me for Vietnam.
Jeez. You knew right then you were going to go to Vietnam? Right?
Oh, no question about it. I had taken all the tests, aptitude tests necessary to gain a seat into the Warrant Officer Candidate Flight Program. The reason they needed so many flight warrant officers was because they lost so many helicopters in Vietnam. I was pretty assured that that's where I was going to go.
So just you're taking the test right off the bat. They were going to slate you as a pilot.
Assuming I successfully completed basic combat training at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and then the officer candidate portion of the Warrant Officer Flight Program and Flight School.
Really? So prior to this, you never flew in your life?
No, I had.
Oh, had you? You had a commercial license?
No, I was 19, but I had been flying airplanes prior to that. My father taught me how to fly. He was in the Civil Air Patrol for over 20 years, and when I was a little kid, I'd fly with him in the back seat of an L-19, which is a cloth, single, tandem aircraft, two-seat,
okay.
an old 85 horsepower motor. So I was, by the time I was 16, I was flying, and they hadn't quite had my pilot's license by the time I was 19, but I was well on my way.
Jeez, that's nice. So now it sounds like a lot different from in 68, because you said you went through training, you graduated. Like nowadays, you have to be a sergeant and so many years in to put in for warrant officer. What was your rank when you were commissioned as warrant officer?
Well, in the Army back in the day, they had a program called High School to Flight School, and your requirements were to have, you had to have a minimum of a high school diploma and the ability to pass all the flight aptitude tests and officer candidate tests that were necessary at the time. And if you've completed all that, then you had the opportunity to apply for a flight class. And then if accepted upon graduation of boot camp and those things, then you would go to the program. If anywhere along the way that you washed out of either boot camp or, well, certainly not boot camp, but flight school, the OCS portion, or the flight training itself, you were immediately reverted back to a private and placed in the infantry. for a remainder of 2 years service. So it provided motivation to do well.
They always knew the great way to motivate you, didn't they?
And I did well in flight school. When I did graduate, 15 days later, I was in Vietnam. They were true to their word. I have to say that. The Army, when it tells you something, you can take it to the bank.
Let you go on leave first prior to...
They did. Yeah. They did. I got to go home. Prior to actually enlisting, I was in college, but I wasn't really interested in going to school. I didn't find it challenging. I graduated from high school at 17 and then enrolled in a college. I was taking classes, but it just didn't have any meaning for me, really. I didn't see the importance of it. Of course, later in life I did, but at the time it was more exciting to go off in ventures to fly the friendly skies of Vietnam.
They were friendly skies, weren't they?
Friendly fire, perhaps. Yeah.
So your first unit, you now completed
Sure.
your pilot license, and you went over to Vietnam. What was your first unit over there?
I was in Bravo Company, a 158th Aviation, an Assault Aviation Battalion, at Lift Unit with the 101st Airborne Division. And we were stationed at Camp Evans, which was north of the city of Hue, which, where you Marines had quite the engagement just in 68. So I arrived there in 69. And our base of operations was the Ashall Valley, Quezon, and Points West, which was in the Laos. But we couldn't talk about that for years and years.
Yeah, I heard a lot of people that were that in Cambodia.
The other large operation I was in that actually a movie was made of was Hamburger Hill.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was. My first 30 days in Vietnam, I went down twice in a helicopter. And I'm pretty sure that was going to be the end of me. I was not going to return from Vietnam. But thank God I did.
So learning from, Dad was teaching you how to fly a plane. Now learning all the components of a helicopter, is there a big major difference?
It's completely different. An airplane is so much easier to fly than a helicopter.
Is it?
You wouldn't believe it.
Really?
Yes.
Somebody would say the opposite. They would think a helicopter looks easy to fly.
Oh, no. An airplane, you line it up on the runway, you apply power, and you pull back on the stick when you hit the appropriate airspeed. Helicopter takes both hands and both feet operating at all times to make it
pedals.
Function. Yeah, both pedals. The pedals operate the anti-torque tail rotor in the rear of the aircraft, which adjusts the blades, and the cyclic in the middle of the pilot's legs operates the main rotor of the aircraft. And the collective on the left side of the pilot operates the pitch of the blade. So as you move forward to go further and faster, you have to increase pitch, which increases the bite on the blade, which increases more thrust, and then the plane of the blade to the direction of the aircraft, at the same time applying the left pedal for the anti-torque of the aircraft. So all those have to be simultaneous movements while you're flying the aircraft, watching the instruments, the fuel gauge, the pressure gauges, and then having 3 or 4 radios to talk on at the same time.
Piece of cake.
And we didn't have GPS systems or any of those things. You navigated with an infantry map, basically, that you would try and fold up and lay on your leg to read.
They used to have these little books that you can strap to your thigh, and I guess the map would sit there.
Yeah, exactly.
Holy mackerel!
And if you had the window down, you always had to be careful you didn't lose your map. that had happened.
So now you're trying to remember all this. You got this hand here, you got one here, and you got your pedals. Plus you got people in the back, you got people shooting at you, and you got to have patience of steel.
Some of the more complex maneuvers in that regard, that I'm sure those viewers hopefully that would remember, is operating in northern I-Corps. There were a lot of huge mountains, like Mount Charleston in those areas, and some of the trees would be 150 feet high, monster trees. And then when we would go into an LZ, or a landing zone, that was very, very tight, you had to hover down the aircraft through those trees. And oftentimes the crew chief would be in the back, where the door gunner, both of them would be saying, come left, come right, go forward, go back. And your movements had to be very precise, and you had to listen to your crew very carefully, because you would occasionally chop trees down or limbs. You wouldn't chop a tree down.
I can imagine the light branches and such.
Yeah, and it always made it interesting when you get about halfway down and somebody starts shooting at you, because you either have to go up or down, and depending on the you know, what you're going down for, if it's to recover someone who's injured, or you know, you're putting a team in or taking a team out. You know, raised blood pressure quite a bit sometimes.
I can imagine. You still fly today, or?
I haven't flown since I've been the superintendent of Nye County School District, because I just haven't had the time.
Really?
Yes.
But I imagine it's like anything else, like riding a bike. Once you learned it, it's, you know.
I don't think it'd take me long to get back in the saddle, because I flew, well, I flew for over 20 years, you know, in various assignments in the military.
What was your hairiest mission in Vietnam when you were doing your lifts?
Oh my goodness. There's so many, it's hard to say which is the hairiest.
The one that sticks out?
I had I don't know, the good fortune and to be awarded 19 air medals for my experiences in Vietnam. And I'd say one of probably, well, it's hard to say which is the hairiest, but
they were all challenging.
Yes, they were. One I received the Air Medal for Valor. This particular one was Firebase Ripcord. It was a battle in April, started in April of 1970. And the firebase was being mortared, and of course they waited till there was an insertion of troops, and the 326th Engineer Battalion was there, you know, with their little dozer, you know, trying to build bunkers and things like that. And they had wounded, and I was flying a Loach at the time, an OH-6. It's an observation aircraft, and I had I had the Engineer Battalion Commander in my left seat, the flying observer, and I was right seat flying the pilot in the observation aircraft. And we spotted the flash from the mortar position. So I was trying to direct the attack helicopters, the Cobras that were in the area, to where the fire was coming from, and we weren't able to communicate effectively. So the colonel said, well, I see it, let's just go. And I said, thank you. So we made a low pass, very low pass over at throwing smoke grenades and hand grenades at the mortar position that was protected by 51 caliber machine guns.
Oh, jeez.
Which, you know, that was one time that my throat would not function. I hit the microphone button to talk, and just nothing would come out. So we flew over, marked it, then the Cobras came in beside us and behind us and laid down enough fire and took the mortar position out. Jeez. And then we went on about the rest of our business for the day.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break.
Sure.
And get a cup of coffee and join us. Going to talk to Dr. Roberts some more, Colonel Dr. Roberts. Come right back.
Yeah, thanks.
Left foot, left foot, left foot. Low right, lift up. Low right, lay up. I left it right, lift up. Left it right, lay up. Low right, lay up. Low right, lay up. Left it right, lift up. Left it right, lay up. Low right, lay up. Left foot, left foot, left foot. Low right, lift up. Low right, lay up. I left it right, lift up. Left it right, lay up. Low right, lay up. Low right, lay up. Left it right, lift up. Left it right, lay up. Low right, lay up. Low right, lay up.
Sure. All right, welcome back. We're talking to my guest, Colonel Dr. Roberts. He did 20 years?
22 years active
22
duty.
years. 1968, retired in 1990. Yeah. And we were talking about some of his missions over while in Vietnam. What was your rank by this time when you were
I was a Warrant Officer 1. We call them wobbly ones. And a Warrant Officer rank is between the commissioned officer and an enlisted rank. It's a technical rank that in the military, in World War II, they had flight officers that had similar positions. They weren't a commissioned officer and they couldn't command a unit, but they within the aviation field would be pilots. And at the time, the Army did not have an aviation branch in the 60s, because when the Air Force and the Army separated in 1948, the Air Force took the mission of providing air support for the ground forces. But the United States Army couldn't go along with not having its own little aviation elements. So they eventually built up the helicopter fleet to where it was larger than the Air Force. And anyway, so I was a Warrant Officer 1 at the time. And then I was promoted to Chief Warrant Officer when I was in Vietnam. And at the end of my tour, I received a direct commission to First Lieutenant.
Okay.
So I left Vietnam as a First Lieutenant.
And then how long were you in Vietnam for?
Just a year.
You were there for a year?
One long year, yep.
So from there, you came back stateside and went to...
I was assigned to officer basic course at Fort Knox, Kentucky, because I was commissioned as an armor officer, which in itself caused some stir within the 101st Airborne Division, because it being an infantry airborne division, when I had the opportunity to select a branch, I chose armor, which are tanks. And the interview board while I was there said, "Why in the world are you doing that?" And I said, "Well, the hull of the tank is a lot thicker than the fatigue shirt that we were wearing," and they understood my reasoning and allowed me to do that. So I was commissioned at 61204, which was an aerial scout, because of the type of aircraft I flew at the end of the observation. And anyway, so I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky, where I became an armor officer as my basic branch. So subsequent assignments, I was assigned to the 6th Armored Cavalry Regiment, the 4th of the 12th Cavalry Squadron, and the 1st of the 10th Cavalry Squadron, and then some armor units. And so I would go between either in the air cav or the ground cav or an armor unit to and then later various staff assignments.
So they would still ask you to fly, even though you were armor?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
that's
because
good.
And then I later transitioned into Cobras, attack helicopters. And their philosophy was that the armor officers, who better to fight tanks than people who knew about tanks.
Yeah.
So I was eventually assigned to Europe with the 1st Armored Division in an attack helicopter battalion, and particularly the 175th Attack Helicopter outfit.
And how long were you over in Europe?
3 years.
Wow. Where were you at over there?
I was in Bavaria, Illesheim-Katterbach, which is near Nuremberg.
Okay.
And our mission, that was 1977 through 80. We were I think we were outnumbered 7-1 against the Warsaw Pact nations, and so our basic tactics at the time were to deplete or degrade the enemies, kill as many of the enemy as possible, in various fighting positions that we had already located and scouted and prearranged to hoard blunt the horde until we would then die in place.
Okay.
Waiting for a nuclear reaction or a tactical nuclear response is what we had planned for at the time, and then trying to fight delaying action long enough to get the dependents out of Europe, out of Germany.
Really?
Because your families were with you.
Okay. So now, by this time, what rank were you?
I was major when I left Germany.
Okay.
And upon reassignment to the States, I was assigned to the 116th Armored Cavalry Regiment as an advisor.
And what did you do there exactly?
Well, I worked with them in tactics, operations, maintenance. It's a National Guard unit that goes from Idaho it was Idaho, Utah, Nevada. It covered a big part of the West. So I was there as a trainer for the National Guard for 2 years. And that's where I went back to college because the Guard works every weekend, and so I had some time during the week to enroll in college and worked on a master's degree.
Okay.
I'd received a bachelor's degree earlier because I would go every time you went to a new post camp or station, I would go take night classes, weekend classes, and whenever you could, correspondence courses, all those things, because the Army wants their officers to be college educated,
and well-rounded.
So that was something I had to do to stay in the Army and be competitive, not be riffed. Which there were several rifts in the Army while I was in.
What is a riff?
A reduction in force.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when the Vietnam War wound down, they riffed some 10,000 commissioned officers.
And I guess it was based on how many had not had college.
College. It was college, command, career course, and done well on your evaluations. So if you didn't have those things, then you were let go.
It's kind of like now they go to combat war college. I don't know if they had that then.
Well, there is a war college, but it's much later in your career. I first attended the Command General Staff College, Fort Leavenworth.
Okay, I heard about that one.
Yeah.
I knew some officers that went to that.
Mm-hmm.
So now from there, you briefly touched on, you were an instructor at West Point.
I was.
How did you get into West Point as an instructor?
That was another interesting story that we don't have enough time to get into. But I will tell you, I was assigned there. I was the only direct commissioned officer that was an instructor at West Point, who had been a warrant officer and an enlisted man. Everyone else who was an instructor there were either West Point graduates or distinguished military graduates from some other universities.
All straight officers, too.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So you were considered, you were the exception, that
I
you
was.
were prior enlisted and
enlisted, warrant, an aviator, and a direct commission, and So I was an instructor, but then by the time I left, I was the chief of the military science instructional branch as lieutenant colonel. So I had 40-some of those officers that worked for me, and then another 40 that taught part-time.
Jeez, how
And
long
we taught
were you
all
an
the
instructor at West Point?
3 years.
Really?
3 years.
I have to ask you, did you meet General Schwarzkopf, General Powell?
I met so many foreign dignitaries and general officers, and it was fascinating. It was the best assignment I've ever had, steeped in culture and history. And
oh, yeah, I can imagine. The history of West Point itself goes back.
I had the opportunity to have lunch with President Nixon, former President Nixon. Met Henry Kissinger. We sat around and had a drink together, and he talked trash about the Russians. Clancy, the writer, they were just, you know, everybody there you can imagine. I had to, part of my job was to brief foreign dignitaries and military generals concerning the military training at West Point, what the kids went through and things like that.
The strategies and such. Well, that must have been one heck of an assignment to have. Now,
oh, it was.
That would be considered...
And the football games were wonderful, too.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
You know, those were, you know, every weekend right there at West Point. It was a wonderful place to be.
Now, I imagine that was a feather in your cap as far in enhancing your career, being an instructor at West Point. I imagine that carried some weight.
Yeah, when I left there, I pretty much could have any assignment in the Army.
But that's what I figured. Yeah, something like that. I mean, jeez. I mean,
and I chose, and they agreed to assign me. I was then sent to be a professor of military science at Stetson University. So when I left West Point, and for those of you who don't know, Stetson University is about 30 minutes from Daytona Beach. I'm just saying that, you know, it's where I decided to, you know, retire from in my career at that point.
Really? You did it
And,
out in Daytona?
I did. It was tough, you know, having PT at the beach. But, you know, we, much like you Marines, you know, we learned to train in the sand.
Yeah, we did.
Of course, it was a little different, you know, being a colonel as opposed to being a private. But it was a wonderful experience. And when I left there, I came out to Nevada and became a high school teacher in Incline Village. I taught a high school ROTC and worked on my doctorate from University of San Francisco. So while I was teaching, I was going to school like I had for the last 20 years.
Jeez, just kept going.
I did. And so then I finished my doctorate in '91, and then I got a position as a vice principal and then principal of the school up there. So I was the principal of the Incline Middle School and then Incline High School and then Reno High School in Reno, and was recruited to apply for the position of superintendent in my county school district.
And
So I've been here 8 years.
Been doing this superintendent for 8 years now?
8 years, yeah. It's very challenging,
I can imagine. Jeez.
It's different.
But I imagine all your years, especially from West Point and all the instructor courses you've done, you implement a lot of that? You use a lot of what you were taught back then?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's all that education served me very, very well.
I bet.
You know, the dealings, you know, with, you know, the military, they always taught you to take care of your men. Yeah. You know, to treat people with respect and dignity and honor. And that very, very holds true in this field.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you get out of people what you give them, and if you show them that you're willing to work as hard as they are and not ask them to do something you wouldn't do, you know, they'll go the extra mile for you.
That's like I always tell my kids, you know, it's a two-way street. You got to show respect to earn respect.
And what you did yesterday was, you got paid yesterday. It's what you did today. You know, it's, did you work hard today? Did you put in the hours and time and do what you needed to do? My father taught me that. You know, don't tell me what you did last week. Tell me what you're doing today.
Yeah, really.
You know,
the only hard day was yesterday.
That's right.
So you still always tell my troops.
And you got paid for that. So,
now we briefly touched on. I'd like you to explain that pin that you have right below the flag, a little wing, and there's a star.
These are miniature aviator wing, and in the Army, and it's the same in the other services as well, Air Force and Marine, Navy, I believe. The star means you're a senior aviator, which means you have a minimum number of years and hours of flying experience, and I believe it was, if I can remember correctly, it was 5 or 6 years and 1,000 hours of flying time to be rated with the star. And then the wreath on the star means you are a master aviator, and then I think in the Air Force you're command pilot. I think that's what they call it. but it allows you to fly in various weather conditions and those kinds of things, and clear other pilots to do that well beyond you know, a beginning pilot. So and that's like 15 years of flying experience and 3,000 hours.
Jeez.
So
A lot of windshield time.
it is. And the thing about a helicopter, unlike an airplane, when you fly a helicopter, you fly a helicopter. You don't just trim it up and sit back and talk and
put it on cruise control, automatic pilot.
No,
yeah.
Well, I don't know about now, but there was no automatic pilot, no GPS. You know, even when I was flying Cobras, attack helicopters, our gun sight was 1950s. Air Force,
yeah.
you know, basically a piece of plexiglass with a red reticle on it that you would line up the aircraft to try and shoot the rockets at, you know, the enemy.
Talk about being primitive. I know it was like the radios that we used when I was on active duty were still dated back to Vietnam and some back to 1950s.
Well, what got me was you know, we had sea rations. You know, we didn't have MREs. We had sea rations.
Sea rats.
And some of the sea rations were from Korea.
Yeah.
I think, and you know, you were always excited when you got a can of peaches or white bread or something, you know, from the Korean War, and that was a treat. And I didn't smoke, so I could trade my you know, cigarettes for all kinds of things. You know, ham and lima beans. You know, that was always a big hit. Spaghetti meatballs.
Yep, spaghetti meatballs. I used to like those.
Yeah.
Now I noticed you have on your tie you have the 82nd Airborne logo.
Oh, this would be the 101st.
101st. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
That's quite all right. That's Old Abe, the Screaming Eagle.
The Screaming Eagle,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and it's a proud combat division, and I'm still a member of the association, 101st Airborne Division Association.
Now, on that
dues
note,
paying.
Did you do any jumping? Did you ever get your jump wings?
I went to jump school, and I got injured in jump school. I had a busted leg, and I never went back. I figured that God was telling me something at that point, that He meant for me to continue to fly.
Yeah, jumping out of perfectly good aircrafts.
Yeah, and you know, He let me go with that, and that was the end of that experience.
But I noticed your tie clasp is a sword.
It's a saber.
It's
It's a cavalry saber.
There you go.
Yeah, like I said, I've spent, I can't tell you how many years in the Cav. Well, I probably could have sit down. But I have I still have my cavalry Stetson. And I have it in my office here in Pahrump. Yeah, and it's quite a tradition in the Cav. You know, the mission of being a scout, and I flew scouts a lot, and you know, I followed footprints flying in there. You know, a helicopter hovering that low and that slow, and I flew under a tree one time, not realizing that you know, that there was a tree there.
You just got so focused on what you were doing.
I got focused on the footprints along a riverbank.
Jeez.
You know, and I was just fortunate not to be in any difficulty, but. And it's, you know, it's a great esprit de corps in those kind of units. You know?
Oh yeah.
Guys doing some crazy stuff, you know, and they still do, you know, and they all have their special units. But I think the military is good for any young man, and now any young woman. I think, you know, I really think compulsory service should be a part of the Americans' education for young people. If nothing else, a year, you know, it teaches you to follow orders, to do what you need to do, and
matures you a little bit.
It matures you, and for a lot of people, you learn a trade or skill. And, you know, it's the military is the largest education system in the United States.
Not like they won't spend the time or the money to educate you on what they want you to learn.
You know, and the thing about it is, how many failures did you really have in any of the military training camps that you went through? Because they would retrain you, or they'd find out how to train you.
Right.
That you would learn. Now, some people motivated by fear. I realize that, but you know, and then some by kindness. You know, just think about it. The military trains pilots and Navy captains and engineers, you know, and cooks and clerks and everything in between.
Yeah,
and,
we do it all.
Absolutely. It's a great place to be.
Well, Colonel, Jeff has given me the sign that it's time for us to wind up. So I want to thank you for being on the show. And if you'd like to be on the show, give me a call at 513-2056. You have a story, I want to hear it, and I want to share it with everyone else, just like I did with Dr. Colonel Roberts. Until next week, Semper Fi. We'll see you then.
Always faithful.
Hoorah. Thank you for being on the show, Colonel.
Thank you, sir. Never